It's Friday, and once again, we look ahead to the big sporting fixtures of the weekend. Lots of football to look forward to, from the Zambian Copper Belt to the Angolan Girabola, and of course, the big Chelsea Arsenal derby this Sunday. They say the art of conversation is to talk about the right thing at the right time, and this is the right place. You're watching The Conversation. Welcome to The Conversation. I'm Ehi Alonge, and as ever in the studio with me, bringing that Friday feeling, is Carlos Salvador. Carlos, hello.
Hi, hey.
And joining us on Skype from South Africa, African football analyst Ponga Luwewe. Hello, Ponga.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you with us. So let's start straight away with the Zambian Premier League, and the club's Mufulira Wanderers will meet Power Dynamos in a Copper Belt derby on Saturday. Now, what used to be one of the biggest games in Zambian football is back on for the first time for over a decade. Okay, Ponga, I actually want to start with you because obviously this game has not been on for a decade because one of the teams got relegated. But generally, for those of us that aren't close to the Angolan League, can you tell us a bit about the league in general?
Yes, looking at Zambian football, it was really up there in the 70s and 80s, but then we had a period of privatization, and obviously that affected the copper mines because they were sold off, and then the mines which used to look at football as a social responsibility area suddenly became all focused on profit. So they took a lot of the money out of sport. Zambian football went downhill. Some of the clubs were able to sustain themselves, such as Power Dynamos, but Mufulira Wanderers was one of the casualties, hence their departure from the top scene for several years.
Okay, good pick up there because I actually said Angolan by mistake, but that's Carlos's fault because that's where he's from. But let's carry on. I just want to look at the teams individually. Carlos, you've been looking at them. What have you insights you can give us to either team?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that kind of stands out to me is that both Power Dynamos haven't won since 2011, and of course, Mufulira had been relegated. So the last time they were in the Super League would have been in 2005. So quite interesting to me, Ponga, because I just wanted to know within that timescale, although these were the two traditionally big rivalries, Zambian football has changed and has seen some other teams take those stand in the last couple of years.
Definitely so. I spoke earlier about the mining crisis on the Copper Belt, which affected about 6, 7, 8 teams that were previously the dominant teams. And then we saw, because Zambian football is a set of clubs who are run by institutions, we saw the Army and Air Force teams come up. We saw teams such as Zanaco, owned by the bank, such as Zesco United, owned by the electricity utility company, become more dominant because obviously those industries and the government sector through the military were the ones that had the financing, and they then began to become more dominant. But in recent years, we've seen a resurgence from the mining teams because the price of copper went up. 90% of Zambia's exports is copper related. So if copper goes down, the whole copper belt feels it. But they've been able to bounce back with the rise in copper prices in recent times. And we've seen Nkana, which is owned by Mopani Copper Mines, as well as Mufulira Wanderers, which is also owned by Mopani, again begin to re-emerge as forces in Zambian football. So it's good for the game because the traditional hub and the real support and the thousands who really turn out for matches, unlike in the capital, Lusaka, come from the Copper Belt. So you can see increased attendances. You can see there's much more interest generated, generally, much more TV coverage.
Okay, Ponga, this is closer to a Classico type derby because obviously, just for those that know, again, the two teams aren't actually from the same city. The Copper Belt is more of a provincial type setup, isn't it?
Correct. Within Kitwe itself, where Power Dynamos come from, their biggest derby is against Nkana, which is about 1.5 kilometers across the road. So you can imagine the chaos there. But within the Copper Belt itself, there is a lot of pride because if you look at Mufulira, the town was built around a copper mine. It's a similar situation with Kitwe, where Nkana are, and Power Dynamos, with Luansha, where Roan United are. So there's this inter-town rivalry within the Copper Belt itself. And that's what makes it big. Again, when you look at Zambian football history, all the talk is about the Copper Belt until in more recent times when other teams started to emerge.
Okay, well, let's move on to the Girabola next. And it's another big game. This time it's between Petro Atletico and Primeiro do Agosto in Angola on Saturday. Agosto third and Petro ninth in the 16-team league. Carlos, before we go any further, I hope I said those two names well.
Well enough, yeah. Petro de Luanda and Primeiro de Agosto.
Okay, Primeiro de Agosto. Well, do you want to give us a bit of insight on those? I mean, Angolan football generally, I mean, we'll come to some points that we were talking about before that, but do you want to give us some insights again to this team and this particular fixture at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest two teams in the league and in the history of Angolan football. Neither of which have won the league in the last couple of years. I think Petro last won in 2009 and Primeiro de Agosto in 2006. So it's been a while since they've won it. But when you look at the records, Petro has won it 15 times. And Primeiro de Agosto 9. And the third place is Aza, who's only won it 3 times. So traditionally they are the big two. But, over the last couple of years, there've been some other winners because obviously they faltered.
Okay, Ponga, I want to come to you because we were talking just before we went on air and you were giving us some interesting insights actually into the cash-rich and actually quite strong nature of the Angola Premier League.
Yes, obviously, with Angola being one of the fastest growing economies in the world, thanks to the petrol that comes through there. Although the price has dropped dramatically in the last couple of months, but it is still an economic force. Previously, they had Rivaldo, the great Brazilian, who went there briefly to play. So it shows you the stature of Angolan football. When they hosted the African Cup of Nations in 2010, they spent $200 million just to refurbish and build stadiums. So they do have the finances. Although having said that, besides their qualification for the World Cup in 2006, Angola haven't really been up there among Africa's best. They do qualify sporadically for the African Cup of Nations. But I think internally the game is probably a lot bigger than when you look at the national team, because you have the local rivalries, you have both clubs who are institutions. And if you look at their business model, it's more like a Barcelona, which is a sporting clubs, which means they have basketball clubs, volleyball clubs, the football club as well. So they are quite well entrenched in Angolan sport.
Okay, I mean, you have mentioned there the strength of other sports. I mean, Angola, as Ponga's pointed out there, Angola is not really known on the world stage for producing top-end players. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, the only standout player in terms of internationally would be Manusho, who is the captain of the national team, and obviously playing at Rayo Vallecano. But he was at United for a spell, and then played also for Hull in the Premier League. So that's the biggest in terms of international exposure. In reality, as Pong has said, most of these clubs are sporting clubs, and the biggest sport in terms of international recognition within Angola is basketball, where Angola has done well within the African nations and also in the Olympics.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for both your insights into two big matches in the world of African club football this weekend. Ponga, I want to thank you especially. We're going to stay here in studio and move on to discuss EPL. But thank you, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay. Everybody else, we'll see you after the break. Welcome back to the conversation. We look ahead now to the big Premier League game of the weekend, the Chelsea-Arsenal face-off. But let's look first at the current standings going into the weekend. And as we can see there, it's a very close race for second. I think it's a given that Chelsea should be winning the league, but also Man City might actually be in with a shout of finishing in the top 3 at least, complicating the start of the season for whoever's in fourth, whether that be United City or indeed Arsenal. So Carlos, straight away, let's start with the two key fixtures on Sunday. Obviously we have Everton, Man U, but I think the whole world and their son will be watching Arsenal-Chelsea. A lot of animosity in history between the managers on a personal level. On a professional level, Arsenal haven't beaten Chelsea for 10, 11, 12 fixtures now. How do you see this going, given especially that Chelsea seem happy to park the bus and see the season out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chelsea is always, under Mourinho, felt it's fine to park the bus. He has a mentality of winning is important as opposed to the style of winning. And he has a very disciplined team, as we saw last week against United. He puts them out there, very disciplined. They know what to do, and they go out and do it. As you said rightly, there is animosity between the two. last year, of course, Jose Mourinho calling Arsene Wenger a specialist in failure. So, this game's a big one, not just for who's going to win the title this year, but also looking at next season. If Arsenal can get a good win over Chelsea on Sunday, and they win the FA Cup, let's say, their fans and the club will start to feel like they're going in the right direction. So I think it's big for Arsenal to win.
Okay, obviously another competitor in the race for second anyway, even though they're possibly in the race for third with their City rivals, is Man United. They're also in a key fixture against Everton. Everton, I mean, before we look at United, Everton have had a topsy-turvy season. I think maybe the UEFA Cup possibly has been too much of a challenge for the squad to maintain form in the Premiership.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think, as you've mentioned, they haven't been in European competition and had to balance that with the Premier League. So they found it tough. But as we know, United-Everton games are never easy, especially this one being at Goodison. So it's a hard one to call that.
Okay, and I mean, City, we'll be looking at it also from the Villa aspect, but from the City aspect, they've got a home match at the weekend against Aston Villa. There's talk of new managers, there's talks of clear-outs, there's Yaya Toure in the press hinting at leaving but hinting at staying. Aston Villa seem focused and know that they just have to win every game they're in from now to the end of the season to have a happy end to the season, including the FA Cup final probably. But Man City, is it possible that the rails have actually come off fully now?
No, I don't believe so. I think, the way City appears to the outside eye is very professional. I think the club will deal with what they want to deal with at the end of the season. But at this moment in time, they've got a very cool-headed manager who's going to ask his players to go out there and win. They're not going to want to come behind United at any cost. So I think they'll do as much as they possibly can to win.
Let me jump in there on the point of the manager. There was even talk that perhaps if they didn't finish in the top three or didn't pick up their form, he'd be gone before the end of the season amongst some journalists in the United Kingdom. Do you think he's going to be there next season?
Whether he's going to be there next season really depends on City and their model. We spoke last week at the fact that they asked him for 5 trophies in 5 seasons, and he's still, on target, regardless of not winning anything this season. So it really depends on whether they like the style of play, whether they feel that the team's going in the right direction. That's something that, is hard to answer from the outside.
From the outside, of course. Okay, let's move on to the bottom half of the table now. And as you can see there, Crystal Palace, Everton, West Brom, Newcastle at the top of the table. However, there's a lot of competition at the bottom, and I guess no match this weekend possibly has more riding on it in terms of the rewards for staying in the Premier League alone than Leicester, or Burnley, shall I say, versus Leicester. That is your classic 6-pointer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we spoke about the top of the table, but I think this is the biggest game in the Premier League this season, or on this weekend. Chelsea's going to win the league anyway. Arsenal will finish in the Champions League, but who's going down? Burnley have had a good run recently, but not better than Leicester. Leicester's won the last 2 games, but Burnley's at home. And where they have lost, they still performed very well. They're a strong team at home. So it's a hard one to call. I see it finishing as a stalemate. But if I had to give it an edge to one team, I'd probably say Leicester based on their current form.
Okay, stalemate, who does that work better for? Because Leicester still have a better, or at least they have more home matches in their run-in than Burnley do. So for them, would a stalemate actually be a better result than for Burnley?
I think a stalemate would be a better result for Queen's Park Rangers. Because if QPR did the job at home to West Ham, it actually means that they would be on 29 points and above those 2 teams. So the stalemate's actually in favour of QPR, the only other team in the bottom 3 at the moment.
Okay, you talk about the movement of QPR there, but there are other teams perhaps currently outside the top 3. I mean, we're looking at fixtures here. We're talking about Crystal Palace taking Hull. Hull, some argue, could still be dragged back in if they don't rediscover their early season form. Stoke, Sunderland, Sunderland in all sorts of trouble at the moment, both on and off the pitch, wrong sort of headlines. And Villa as well, and possibly even Newcastle, who under John Carver are yet to, I think they've lost their last 10 or something and seem to be completely bereft of spirit as far as the fans, both fans and players are concerned. Any danger of any club currently sitting outside the top 3 being dragged right back into the mire?
Well, I mean, I think that the tough one is, we talk about Hull, let's say, I don't think Hull's a situation of being dragged back in. They're in there. because their form's been very poor, and they're playing a team in Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace will be at home. They faltered against West Brom last week, but that's Tony Pulis coming back and working his magic. If you look at the game before that, Crystal Palace never looked like they was going to lose. So I think it's a very difficult one for Hull, and I can see them being dragged in. To be totally honest, as in terms of South Sunderland and Newcastle, Aston Villa, of all three of those, I'd say that Newcastle is in the most of danger because, as you said, there just doesn't seem to be a confidence on and off the field.
Okay, Aston Villa, you've pointed out Newcastle being in danger. Aston Villa, could the FA Cup final prove a distraction? Because for some of those players, it's possibly the biggest game of the season. And give or take that, even if Villa stayed, maybe some of those players would move on because they've had a few poor years at Aston Villa recently, a few flat years. Would you say the FA Cup final could prove a distraction, both for Villa and indeed possibly for Arsenal, depending on how the results this weekend go?
Both Villa and Arsenal, I don't think it's going to be a distraction. I think it's been more of a bonus for Aston Villa, just because you're under pressure week to week in the Premier League, and they had an opportunity to go as far as they did in the FA Cup. Those FA Cup games would have given them the confidence that they can take back into the Premier League, and better yet, they beat West Brom. Cross-city rivals within, to get into the semi-finals and now the final. So I think the FA Cup's been wonderful for Villa because that's where they've drawn their confidence from.
Okay. Every week I'm going to ask you this until the end of the season when it's all done. 3 teams. No need to sort of qualify your thinking. 3 teams going down.
I think Hull. I'm going to go Burnley and I'm going to go Leicester.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hull, Burnley, Leicester fans, sorry to hear that, but we'll see whether he's right after the weekend. And we'll see you after the break. Welcome back to the conversation. There are 2 games to go, 4 teams in the hunt, and 2 automatic promotion places. It's a numbers game at the top of the championship in English football. And let's take a look. As we can see there, it's very, very close. Carlos, what I want you to pick out, just as you picked out the bottom 3 to get relegated, who do you think is going to go straight up from that list there?
Definitely for me, Watford and Bournemouth will go up. I think they've been strong. Watford especially, just in terms of I've lost count how many managers a team can have within one season. But what they've been able to do with all those managerial changes is, stay at the top of the table. So they've done very well. Bournemouth under Eddie Howe, extremely pleasurable team to watch. I think they've already got the style to come into the Premier League and play good football and actually challenge some of the bottom teams in the Premier League. So I think those 2 definitely for me will go, will be in the Premiership without the need of the playoff.
I'll tell you some things I picked out there was that Bournemouth aside, actually, all those teams there have been in and out, bounced up to the Premiership, bounced back. But with the new TV deal, the rewards for a season in the Premiership now are life-changing for some of these clubs and their futures. So the pressure is on there. And what advantage do you see previous, Eddie Howe hasn't managed in the Premiership, for instance, neither has a manager of Watford, but what, as a club, probably total, what advantage do you think previous Premier League experience or previous playoff experience or promotion push challenges would have at this? It's 2 games to go, so you really are at the squeaky bum time.
Yeah, I think, having history and reputation and experience of the Premier League would help if you were bouncing back the season after. But when we look at Watford, they haven't been in the Premier League for a couple of seasons now. And of all those top 6 teams, the only team that has recently would be Norwich. So in all reality, I don't think that plays too much a part because, you've got new players, new managers, and no one within these squads, very few of them would have had this experience. And if you look at Middlesbrough, during the 90s and the early 2000s, they were a recognisable Premier League team. Well, they've been out for several years now. They've got a Spanish manager who's never managed in the Premier League.
But he has managed at Real Madrid. He was assistant manager at Real Madrid, so he's got some experience of pressure.
There is that experience of pressure, and I think the Sky Bet Championship also has its own pressure. And as you've mentioned, looking for promotion into the Premier League carries its own pressure. But I don't think having managed at Real Madrid is going to give him any more of a push than it will Eddie Howe, who's done it up and down the leagues.
I want to pick up on a point with you because we were talking about pressure and about experience. And prior, you were talking about Derby as being your favourite possibly to go through from a playoff situation because they were there or thereabouts last year. However, if we look at the Premier League this year and we talk about Derby, who are push QPR very close, in terms of the quality in this step up, even though you have money, there's only so many quality players around, in truth. Are we going to be seeing which of these teams of that top six you see is best equipped to make a permanent presence of themselves, or at least achieve mid-table security in their first bounce back into the league?
I think the hardest thing always with being promoted to the Premier League is which players you're able to bring in. I think some teams in the past have brought in too many new players, most of which don't have the quality. What teams tend to do is buy players who have been in the Premier League but are coming to the end of their kind of Premier League tenure, which for me is more of a problem, because what you do is you're bringing in a set of players who haven't been in the squad, and now you're giving them all the responsibilities, and the players that promoted you are almost your bench or squad players.
But I want to pick up on that point, and it's kind of key, and especially for a lot of African fans out there who'll be looking at some players like Dele Alli and dual nationality players there in the top of the championship. There's a few Algerians at Watford who are playing very well. But one quality that people have talked about at the top of the championship, and for viewers at home, the championship, as we said, is the club just below the Premiership, and it's where you want to be if you want to get to the promised land of the money and the riches in Premier League. But a lot of those clubs have loan players from the Premiership. English qualified or otherwise, playing for them. Now, you talked a little bit about spirit and about promotion. Take a club like Middlesbrough, who could go up but have to return half their squad to Chelsea. Or, surely there's a bit bigger challenge and a bigger issue there.
Yeah, I think that there is a challenge for those clubs, but I think what will generally happen is the parent club will probably give you that player back during that first season in the Premier League. So, so long as they don't play against them, which they never do. And I think for those type of players, the parent club, is giving that player more experience at the Premier League, which is even better than playing at the Championship. So I think it can work both ways.
Okay, well, I did it to you with relegation, and I know you've kind of hinted at, but can I categorically state that you're picking Watford, Bournemouth and Derby to go up?
Yeah.
Okay, you heard it here first. Well, let's move over to the sport that seems to be tied up by East Africa's elite runners, the London Marathon, which is occurring this Sunday. Former world record holder Wilson Kipsang will defend his title against fellow Kenyan Dennis Kimeto, who made history last year when he broke Kipsang's record to become the first man to run 26.2 miles in less than 2 hours, 3 minutes in Berlin. Let's look at some of the predictions from runners and fans. Right, Carlos, no one has ever seen me eat lunch is going to accuse me of being a marathon runner, but you can't get away from this is quite an exciting event, and it's nice to see that there's a goodwill factor when the East Africans do come to London and set the records and win the competitions. And really, there's much almost as big, they have this big fan following here in the London running community as anywhere.
Yeah, I think, for East African countries, marathon running is the biggest sport. And because of, how well they've done over so many years, they have a great following wherever they go, whether that be in Boston or the London Marathon. I think when you have a marathon and those big Kenyans other East Africans aren't
there is one thing I do want to pick up with you, and I am going to ask you at the end who you think is going to win, by the way. So I'm guessing you're going to have to make up a name. But there's one thing I want to ask you, and that's you're obviously involved in player management, athlete development.
Yeah.
In Kenya, unfortunately, at the moment, there's a lot of focus on the relationship between agents and the top, or at least the developing group of marathon runners. And the Athletics Federation has actually taken away and suspended some agencies. As a principle, bearing in mind the training and development required, do you think that's a good move for the Federation, because they're having all these drug tests, for the Federation to limit the number of outside involvement and try and get the house in order?
I mean, it's a difficult one to answer because, you don't know what's going on in-house. Obviously, they have to get a hand in terms of what's going on. But at the same time, sometimes if you leave it to the federations, you don't always get the individual development of the athlete, which is what a representative or an agent or a manager might be looking to do. So, it's a hard one to call, really.
Okay. For the viewers at home as well who plan to watch a marathon, don't forget, when it comes to the women's side, we've got Kenya's Big Four in action. So it's going to be very competitive. It's going to be probably, my guess is going to be an East African winner. But now I'm going to ask you, Carlos, name me well, actually, let's be honest. It's either going to be Kipsang or Kimeto in the men.
Yeah. I'm going to go for Kimeto.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to go for Kipsang, just so we have a bit of rivalry and something to look over on Monday. Okay, everybody else at home, it's been a pleasure talking about sport in front of you, and now we'd like to talk about it with you. So follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and post your own opinions and queries using the hashtag SNA Conversation. Let's continue Africa's sporting conversation.